Hey, good morning and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us on this NRCoP webinar, which is around focusing on the safety and well-being of frontline officers in the field. And my name is Martin Campbell. I'll be facilitating today and working our way through our speakers. Before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge the land on which we all meet. At the moment, I'm actually in Papua New Guinea, so I acknowledge the Ahi people, who are the traditional owners of the land in Lae, where I am. I also pay respects to the traditional owners of everywhere that we meet on today. So before I introduce our speakers, just a couple of points. As always with the NRCoP webinars, these are recorded and uploaded to the ANZSOG YouTube channel. So take an opportunity to jump onto that and share those links. There's some great material on there from not only today's speakers, but also previous ones. We'll also be sharing some question and answers as we go through the process. So please use the Q&A function on Zoom to ask your question. Have a look at them as well, and if what people are asking resonates with you, then please uptick that, and the upvote will elevate that question further up the list, and I'll be able to see it and pass that question on to our panel members. So if the Zoom webinar does cut out for any reason, please stay with us, and the NRCoP team will get back onto that and bring you back into the session as soon as we can. So quick intro on our speakers today. So we have three speakers who are going to talk to us around their experiences of managing psychosocial safety, mental health, well-being of frontline compliance officers in the field. So this resonates really strongly with me. I was formerly the Work Health and Safety Regulator for South Australia and chair of the Heads of Workplace Safety Authorities, and still heavily involved in the work health and safety space. So to share their experiences, we have Diane Schultz, who is project manager of a really interesting project in the Queensland Department of Justice, Harm Prevention and Regulation Division, with over 20 years working in the Work Health and Safety Regulator there across a raft of management, strategic development and advisory functions in the inspectorate. We also have Luke Bond, who's a former wildlife enforcement ranger and Commonwealth principal investigator. And during his career has led many complex investigations in urban and remote environments, particularly in the field of international wildlife tracking, as well as being seconded to the Australian Crime Commission, and has worked overseas with Interpol, Tasmania Police, Biosecurity Tasmania, and leading the animal welfare investigators. And last but not least, we have Mandy Belfrage, who is the Health, Safety and Wellbeing Project Manager at AHPRA, the Australian Health Practitioners Regulatory Authority, and she's leading Australia-wide projects to optimise health, safety and wellbeing across a combined employee and board and community workforce of about 2,000 people. So we've got some pretty good speakers who are going to share their journey. Before we do that, I'll just sort of quickly, in less than a minute, just sort of set the scene for this. So work health and safety legislation has been changing pretty significantly in the last 12 months around the psychosocial safety space. I chair the National Psychosocial Safety Network, which is around helping organisations identify how to keep people mentally and well at work as well as physically safe. So there is now work health and safety legislation across the jurisdictions which mandate duties of businesses, officers and individuals to look after people's mental health and well-being as much as physical aspects. And quite often, those people who are helping others can get forgotten. And that's what this session is around. It's about helping those people who are helping others and dealing with quite difficult and confronting situations. And those situations now firmly fall within the remit of psychosocial safety regulations. So with that, I'll start the process. Please keep your questions in the chat box and let us know, and we'll ask those at the end. But we'll work our way through our three speakers, and I'll start off by introducing Diane. who will share the work that she's been doing in the harm prevention and regulation division. So Diane, welcome and thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Martin. Hello, everyone. Nice to be here. A little bit about the organisation I'm working with at the moment. So we're the Harm Prevention and Regulation Division, and we sit within the Department of Justice and Attorney General, overseeing liquor gaming and fair trading regulation here in Queensland. We have approximately 558 staff, of which we've got 214 compliance officers who undertake those critical field inspection and investigations to monitor industry compliance with the relevant legislation. The fair trading side of the business, we have working with industries in motor dealers, real estate, charities, security providers, tattooists and second-hand dealers. And on the liquor and gaming side, we conduct compliance and technical audits of liquor and gaming operators, liquor gaming and licensing services, and investigations. So just on to the next slide. Thanks, Shannon. Our working in the field brings its challenges, with our compliance staff frequently attending unfamiliar and hazardous workplace environments. Increasingly, our staff are exposed to persons who are influenced by drugs or alcohol, or either alleged or guilty of serious crimes, potentially including assault, rape, and even murder. So there's an increased criminal activity operating also within some of the industries, such as motor trade and scrap metal, which has compounded the risks our staff are potentially exposed to on a daily basis. Our organisational incident and injury data is quite limited, with 16 incidents recorded in the last 5 years. 12 of those meet the legislative definition of workplace violence. But it's the serious incident that occurred last March, where 2 of our compliance officers were assaulted in an unprovoked attack by a member of the public during a night audit that prompted the organisation to now seek a review on the adequacy of our current safety controls. The primary focus of the project is understanding the risk profile for our compliance officers when undertaking those regulatory activities in the field. Just the next slide, please, Shannon. Particularly those undertaking night activities and or working in high-risk environments. The scope is really tight and will focus on the effectiveness of the current health and safety system and policies in place, with a large focus on the consultation with the staff, their managers and supervisors, really to gauge an experience on their field experiences and behaviours, and the capabilities they have to identify and manage risk on the role. Interviews with other interstate regulators will also be undertaken to identify those best practice initiatives that will be useful to inform the mitigation strategies for the future. And a literature scan has been completed, and I'll be sharing the learnings from these with you today. Next slide, please, Shannon. Thank you. As you'd expect, the research highlights diverse occupational hazard groupings faced by regulatory field officers, including those physical, chemical, biological, environmental and psychological aspects. The level that these may apply to our compliance officers varies, and whilst exposure for some of these may not be so frequent, each of these will be considered when developing the risk profile. To keep the project scope tight, the top 5 hazard areas were explored further through consultation aspects, and these are the traumatic events, violence and aggression, fatigue, driving practices and noise exposure. The work-related stress, emotional demands and the cognitive demands are really important contributing factors, and these are also going to be tested through the consultation to understand their impacts to the psychological and physical health of our staff. Given the serious incident that occurred and the anecdotal feedback that I've received about the increased exposure to occupational violence, this topic is being explored in much more detail through the consultation. So this is quite a list. There's a number of features of work, the work environment, structural and situational factors that increase the risk of violence at work. The latest research out of the European Agency for Safety and Health at Work identifies a number of factors that have high relevance, not only to the compliance officer role, but all field and frontline service roles. I've already spoken about the potential exposure to drugs, alcohol and criminal activities, but it's also those other work and environmental factors such as the compliance activity itself that has been shown to increase hostility in customers. And some of our staff are reporting that they feel they're being mistaken for police when they're out on the job. As well as working in mobile or unfamiliar environments, nights and those isolated and remote locations are problematic for us. There are also additional challenges for our regional staff who are undertaking compliance activities in a small town where they either know the customer or can be easily identified or recognised outside of work. And then it flows through into the insufficient training, inadequate resources or limited access to support services that may leave a field officer ill-equipped to recognise and respond to those potential threats effectively and to seek that mental health support following an event. Handling of money and valuables or guarding valuable property doesn't really relate so much to the roles of our staff. However, I've left these in for completeness. Targeted questions around these have all been included in the staff survey so that I can gain a better understanding of our people's experience and the behaviours they experience in the field and responds to these factors, how they respond to these factors. So there's a growing body of evidence that's contributing to the better understanding of the cause and effect relationships between specific health and safety hazards and work-related injury. We've seen a lot about the physical hazards and they're more known, with the psychological health and the technology emerging more recently. A broad scan of the literature showed consistent themes in managing risks associated with the psychological health and safety. And we're really fortunate here in Australia that we've really got a really broad range of expert information and some of the best resources and research minds on the topic here in Australia, including that Mentally Healthy Workplaces Toolkit developed by WorkSafe Queensland. I've worked with this document quite a bit, so I'm quite familiar with it. And if you're not familiar or haven't worked within the framework, I encourage you to take a look. It's very holistic and complete and looks at that flow through to supporting an individual in recovery once they've been injured and you're returning them back to work. So it really gives that all-round approach to managing the risk. So the toolkit's really a valuable resource and it outlines a framework for us to follow through on those 4 principles to promote, prevent, intervene early and support recovery. And this can be equally applied to the physical hazard prevention framework as well. The strategies on the left go beyond the basic risk management that we're all familiar with and that we know so much about, but it's really taking it beyond that base level to building a people-orientated culture where we can engage with and work collaboratively with our workers to identify the solutions and engaging them in those and picking that up and becoming leaders in their workplace. Adopting a systematic approach with attention on the way work is designed and prioritising the systematic reporting of incidents and near misses. Developing a risk profile unique to the work can identify and contextualise the vulnerabilities specific to each organisation and the business unit that they work within and allowing us to focus on what is most important. The importance of leaders and managers cannot be underestimated, and those critical thinking, leadership and self-education skills are key to help our leaders at all levels to be fully aware of their team members' experience and environments that they'll be working in and give them the skills to be able to evaluate, judge, understand and resolve issues more efficiently. Competency and training are at the forefront, as you'd expect. But for field officers, consider the use of experiential training demonstrated in a field-like setting to practice those safe operations. Beyond the usual safety protocols, training competency should extend to decision-making under pressure, situational awareness, de-escalation, conflict resolution techniques, and then moving into emergency preparedness and response procedures are all very important. Implementing measures to promote the mental health and wellbeing of staff, including those stress management programs, employee assistance and peer support networks are vital, and work-life balance, resilience building and self-care practices should be really encouraged in policy development and training programs to enhance the overall wellbeing of our people. As always, the importance of continuous review and improvement are key to ensuring our health and safety strategies remain responsive to the evolving needs and challenges. We're at a really interesting stage of the project now, and I'm gathering all the intelligence through survey, and I'll be travelling the state soon to have discussions with staff. I've got a desktop review of the health and safety management system targeting those priority hazards that I've talked about today, and then bringing it all together in a final report. So there'll be much more outcomes data and implementation strategies to share down the track. So if you're interested, I'm sure that, I'd be happy to come back and share some of those with you when we're ready. So thanks very much for your time. Over to you, Martin.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Diane. Much appreciated. And I would encourage anyone with any questions to pop those in the Q&A, and we'll circle back at the end of the presentation and unpack those. But there's some fantastic insights and work done by Diane and your team, so thank you very much for that. Okay, our next speaker is Luke. So Luke is going to talk to us around the issue of officer safety, something that has been close to my heart as a former work health and safety regulator. And having spent 20 years as a detective, I understand that not only the police, but all emergency service and compliance work has levels of confrontation in it. And now those psychosocial legislation requires us as organisations and leaders to address those risks and controls. So Luke, thank you very much for joining us, and over to you.
Thanks, Martin, and thanks, Diane. It was very interesting to hear what you're saying. It's great that you're shining a light on this really important issue, because if regulators can't feel safe at work, they feel that they're at risk or in danger, how are they possibly going to be able to do their work well, let alone the potential physical or psychosocial impacts that, let's say, occupational violence and aggression can have on those particular workers. And that's what I'm going to really be focusing on today. It's occupational violence and aggression. That's been something that I've been exposed to during my working career, and I've seen its impacts firsthand on other officers and the challenges it poses in managing, containing, controlling, and then moving forward once you've been exposed to occupational violence and aggression. So I'll refer to it as OVA. So it's really important to get things right at the beginning. When we're doing our planning for our regulatory operations, you've got to think about, well, what are the risks? What's the likelihood? What's the consequences? Probably low likelihood, consequences could be catastrophic. So we're dealing with high risk issue. And I really implore people, regardless of what particular field you're regulating, you're working with people. Don't worry so much about the subject matter. Get your communication right. Get your risk management in place right. Think about what are the risks and threats that people could pose to you. Put the controls in place at the very outset. And life clearly is full of risks, and these can never be fully removed, but they can be controlled. And what do we do when things don't go to plan? De-escalation was mentioned. Personally, I don't particularly like de-escalation. I like to refer to it as non-escalation, because if people are already up at a certain level, how are we as regulators going to be able to bring them back down? What we want to be able to do is recognise it for what it is, but not have it further escalate to the point at which it's really potentially going to impact our physical or psychosocial safety. So how do we disengage? When do we disengage? Can we defend ourselves? Can we defend others? So there's all these issues that we need to be considering before we even go out and engage in the first instance. And one of the things that I really implore people to think about when they're planning regulatory or operational law enforcement operations is, does it need to be done now? Can we create certainty? So we've got to be able to create as much certainty as we can in an uncertain environment, whilst being flexible and adaptable. And things don't always go to plan, but we create as much certainty as we can. And we do the work in a time and a place and a manner that puts the odds of success in our favour. So there's three aspects to that, and it's very much about the odds, so you can never fully control it. So the timing, when is it we're actually going to conduct our operations or our activities? How are we going to do that? What are the resources we need to put into this? So time, manner, and the place. Where are we going to do this? And if you can't control those, you've got to be thinking about, well, do we need to actually do the work? What actions and steps do we need to put those controls in place? We often hear about the rise of violence and aggression, anti-authoritarian approaches, and people will use aggression, issues and the impacts of the drugs that are out in society. Mental health's a massive issue, and your simple attendance can be perceived as a threat. Your body language, your tone, your proximity, cultural issues, gender issues. So we need to be able to be prepared for when we go in with the best intentions, but our words fail. What are we going to do? So we need to be thinking about our peace phrases, our communication, things about, being able to ask people and being empathetic. Are you okay? Is this okay to do this now? Explaining what it is you're actually doing. So communications is key. Planning, preparation, and communications. There's all sorts of barriers to communications as well. And what they may be, we may never know. They could be mental health. They could be post-traumatic stress disorders that people are encountering. There could be their own bias. There could be substance. There could be fatigue. There could be all sorts of issues going on behind the scenes. So how are we as a regulator going to be able to de-escalate those tensions and stresses other people are under? We've really got to go in and endeavour not to escalate them to the point of violence and aggression. So, and what's going to be our response when we get the adrenaline dump and we get the amygdala hijack and we're thinking, well, how do we respond to these types of situations? Are we going to freeze? We can't freeze. So if we're recognising this before we engage, we've got, obviously the preference is our flight. Get out of there, be able to, regroup, replan, re-engage as an appropriate time. Can we defend ourselves? These are questions that, you really need to be able to ask yourself, and you need to understand what your capabilities are. And you certainly, if there's a problem, your best bet is to be able to disengage. But how do we disengage? That doesn't just happen automatically. We've got to be able to plan for our disengagement. If we're working with colleagues, we've got to be able to talk. Well, what are our cues? At what point do we disengage? Do we disengage just because someone's getting angry? Or do we disengage at the point where it's simply pointless to continue on with our regulatory options? And when we do engage, how are we going to do that? Are we going to continue to face the threat? We've got to be clear that we're leaving. How do we create and maintain distance so that, that you're actually, physically not within a space that, you're going to actually potentially be assaulted. So this is all part of your planning and preparation, which then needs to be applied in an operational dynamic setting. Communication skills are key. But when you bring yourself into this role, which is challenging, but it's really important that we have effective, fair and professional regulatory operations occurring, we need to bring our mindset that when we wake in the morning, we're likely to face annoying or frustrating or difficult people. And, if we're actually aware that we may encounter this in our work, we're already preparing ourselves. So how am I going to manage it? How am I going to respond so I don't escalate a situation that may already be up here? So really important when these situations do occur that we debrief within our own teams, with our own work groups. We report, threats or near misses. We both report them internally, so there is a record. So strategies and plans and procedures can be put in place, as Diane was talking about, and potentially report these matters to police if it's a threat in a public officer, or obviously if there's an assault, and seek professional support, because we have our responses, we have fear, and we need to be able to manage this so that we can continue to operate in a sustainable, safe manner. So think about things when you're actually going to do your engagement. Always have knowledge and avoid being apathetic or complacent. These things are super dangerous and are going to mean that you've got your guard down. Recognise danger signs when you're seeing them. Acknowledge threats. If it doesn't feel right, don't ignore it and don't soldier on. Don't take this tombstone courage approach, because if you do so, you're doing it at high risk. Avoid false assumptions about people. Threat can come from anyone, anywhere, anytime. Be fit, be healthy. Make sure you're not preoccupied by what's happening. Separate out when you're doing your engagement. Separate out what might be going on in your personal life and focus in, switch on with the situation you're dealing with. So, with your field operations, you need to have, simple and effective steps that you consistently apply with flexibility to increase officer safety and decrease, let's say, offender opportunity to assault or hurt you. Work as a team, but make sure you've got this, this planning process. So pre-operational planning is critical. It can be done in a conversation. It can be done in a full operational plan. It can be done on your way to a job. And the more you work with people, the better you'll get at that. But communication is key, both internally and externally. So I'm just going to kind of wrap it up here. Really important to report, plan and prepare is the key take-home messages from my presentation today. Self-reflection on what you bring to the encounter. I know there's some things that when I've engaged with people operationally, I tick them off for some reasons. I've got to be aware of those things, what they might be. So think about self-reflection. Body cams are great, especially when you're looking at the body camera footage of another officer, of you engaging with, with a client, let's say. And it's a really good way in which you can actually reflect on how you might come across and how you could adjust your own communication styles and your body language and your delivery to not escalate a situation. So I talked on communicate internally before we engage, and have the cues to be able to leave early. Have an awareness of your surroundings when you're out doing your operational activities. If it doesn't feel right, trust your instincts. It's not right. Know why you're there, and communicate this to the client and actively listen. Early identification of risks and taking opportunities and steps to control these are really important. And if you identify a risk that can't be controlled and you identify it early, well, why are you there? Okay, come back to your planning, think about time, place, and manner in which you do your work, and then you're going to enhance your safety. So I'm just going to stop it there. And this is a subject matter that's dear to my heart, and I could talk about this all day. So I'll pass it back to you, Martin. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks very much for that, Luke. And definitely close to my heart too. I've spent 20 years in the police and then another 15 in regulatory roles around Australia. Keeping frontline staff safe from violence is right up there. And we put some things in place with Safewood SA a few years back, which hopefully made it safer for people on the front line. But before we take it any further, thank you for those that are putting questions through the Q&A app. I would encourage everyone else to jump on and upvote, and then after the next presenter, we'll circle back and ask the panel some of those questions. So our next speaker, Mandy, we're going to be talking around well-being of regulators, particularly with a focus on vicarious trauma, which sort of those regulators have that duty to manage very difficult situations around the regulatee. So looking at how that trauma of those people regulated passes to us as regulators. So Mandy, over to you. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And look, thanks for providing me this opportunity to share a little bit about our wellbeing journey here at AHPRA. I've been with AHPRA since 2021, but there's been a dedicated team guiding AHPRA on this journey for a number of years now. For us, it's similar to Di's experience in relation to an event that occurred. For us, it was back in 2017 where an incident occurred which had this potential impact for the health and wellbeing of our people. And very fortunately for us, we had and still have this amazing group of leaders, from our team leaders to executive and senior leaders, that recognised that risk and took action. And as Martin mentioned, I wanted to focus on, our response to vicarious trauma, because unfortunately, as a result of the work that we do in that regulatory space, there is that potential risk of VT. We're hearing, seeing and being exposed to traumatic materials, hearing statements and looking at imagery on a regular basis, and it can take its toll on even the most experienced or perceived resilient people that we have. For us, when we obviously identified that risk, it was about, well, what do we do now? And our focus has always been in supporting our people. What can we do to better support our people? Because they need to be in a space to be able to do that important work they're doing and be the best that they can be when they're doing that. So we took on the stage of research. What's happening in other people, in other organisations? What are they doing? They're exposed to this risk. So we did a lot of work around looking into that. Then once we understood sort of other options, we then partnered with an organisation to help us develop a program which we refer to as our wellbeing and support program, that's developed to help us create a psychologically safe workspace where people feel safe to be open and honest about their health and wellbeing, provide them some practical skills on how to support themselves and identify issues within themselves and perhaps their team as well. So it's been a really important role for us in relation to how we support and manage those risks. part of that program was also identifying our high-risk areas. So we needed to understand which roles, which areas of our business are at highest risk for vicarious trauma. So we took on a activity with that organisation we partnered with to risk assess and understand where those risks are. As part of that also, we acknowledged and understood during that process about the important role our people leaders play in creating that psychologically safe workplace. And we wanted to make sure that we could provide them additional skill building and resources to help build their awareness about health and wellbeing, and also grow their confidence to be able to support their people in their teams. So this program is sort of a phased approach for us. So we started with this foundational section around wanting to build common language to bring everyone on the journey with us. And then also introducing the concept of leading with care. And that leads back to that point about why we were doing this. And it's about supporting people. And leading with care is a term that we've embedded into the business, and you hear it across different areas of the business, not just our high-risk roles. We've been very successful in being able to embed that language around leading with care and that point of view around it's about the people, and that's what it's all about for us. So once we did our foundation part and building that structure of the program, we then rolled out a number of training modules, which included things around managing challenging interactions, preventing and managing vicarious trauma. And that's where we really worked on helping people identify what the signs are in themselves, but also the signs in their teams, so that we could obviously implement support options when needed. The other key or core program was around creating a mentally healthy workforce, which is a dedicated program for our leaders, again, to build that awareness and grow their confidence in having sometimes those tricky conversations with their people when they were not okay. So it really worked on developing that skill set for our people. That then led us into, I guess, the last phase of the program, and it was around reflective practice coaching. And reflective practice is the process of people or ourselves reflecting on our own actions or processes for the purpose of identifying areas of improvement or continuous development for ourselves. And that's a guided process through specially trained people within our organisation to help guide those conversations and those thought processes. And it's not about mentoring or counselling. It's not performance management. It's aimed at developing that self-awareness and self-knowledge, helping to problem solve and sort of build resilience, and understanding what support options are available, because we all are individuals. What's going to work for you is not necessarily going to work for me. So it's about understanding our people and offering options to help support them, especially when they're in these situations and being exposed to these risks. For us, our wellbeing and support program is sort of at the exciting phase of it's been in place for a number of years now. So we're looking at what does the future state look like? So it's kind of stepping back to that beginning stage of thinking about what has happened, what are we doing, what can we do better? Are the risks the same? Do we have more risks? So we're doing some project work around undertaking a psychosocial risk assessment, which is very exciting to help understand exactly where those areas are and what are the other hazards that are interacting with those hazards that make perhaps the risk level higher. And there's also a lot of work been happening, an amazing team in our organisation to consider not just about, well, what is the work doing that impact us, but how does that impact the people that we're regulating? So there's work being done in relation to minimising that risk to the practitioners or the people that we're engaging with in that space. So lots of exciting things happening in our organisation at this time. So that's me. I'll hand back over to Mark. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Mandy. And look, I just want to take the opportunity to say thank you to all three of the presenters for sharing your experience. I think that's probably one of the true values of the ANZSOG community, is that it's real people doing real work, sharing real experiences for the benefit of everyone else, which is fantastic. So, so thank you to those that have shared your questions in the box. And I'm going to jump straight in to the first question from a good friend of mine, Mr. Grant Pink. Hi, Grant. Good to see you on board again. So this is probably, well, end all the panel, but probably I'll throw this to Diane in the first instance. So Safe Work Australia and the Code of Practice talks around a lack of role clarity as a psychosocial hazard. and role ambiguity appeared in one of your slides, Diane. So the question is around agency organisational restructures or machinery of government reshuffles, impact on the clarity of regulators' roles. So what tips or insights can you give us in relation to providing staff with increased role clarity? Yes.
Thank you very much. We've always got to have one webinar process, haven't we, where someone forgets to unmute themselves. So there we are. I've ticked that box for everyone today. That's a big question, especially when we're talking about the overlaps of some of those risk factors for the psychosocial risk factors and how they interplay with each other. And the role clarity is one that if you're not fully understanding of your role and why you're doing your role and what the purpose of your role is while you're there in the field, then that can be a conflict, an internal conflict for yourself, particularly if you're there undertaking that role and you're exposing yourself to increased risk of violence or other stresses while you're out there. So when you talk, some of the, if I got the question correct, it's some of that is where there's an overlap of change as well. So this is where the risk factors start to interplay with each other. So just the lack of role clarity isn't going to, on its own, be the only contributing factor. What we need to do is to look at the interplay of those and see where one will increase the risk of the other. And when an organisation is going through significant change, and coming from the health and safety regulator here in Queensland, I can't imagine a time when our organisation hasn't been going through change, and particularly in government. It's a constant, I guess, is change. So it really does come down to the change management and looking at those position descriptions and making sure that through those change management processes that the role of the individual isn't changing from what the original position description was. But one of the things in the context of us, and it's early days yet, but it's where my mind is starting to go, is actually looking at the role of the compliance officer in and of themselves and the task that they're undertaking while they're out in the field. And when we're looking at the work design factors, do we actually have to be there doing all of those things at that time, at the time when we're going to be increasing the exposure to those risks? So I guess there's a number of factors to come at play, and I guess I don't have enough time to go into it all, but it's certainly to look at making sure that your staff understand the role that they're there to do and make sure that they've got the skills to undertake that role. Make sure that as part of your risk management processes that you're actually evaluating the purpose that you're actually undertaking that role in the first place, and is there changes to the work design or the time of day that you're there undertaking and the people that you're engaging with, and making sure that you're considering some of those other psychosocial risk factors and to see where they can buffer. And we've spoken a little bit today about the role of managers and supervisors, and we know that when your demands are high, where there's role conflict in relation to the work that you're doing, that support can be an incredible buffer to that. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you've got somebody at high risk, but if you know the risks are higher, then you should look at other controls to help reduce that risk. Hope that's been a help.
No, good. Thanks, Diane. And look, and I think I could sort of share some of my experiences. Is that change of government, machinery of government, and organisational restructures tend to be HR-led, and probably never really sat in the work health and safety space too much, or we didn't think of it. But the psychosocial code of practice and the legislation now really firmly puts sort of HR, IR, and work health and safety together. So I've been pretty active on LinkedIn recently, and some of the work I've been doing is around trying to merge those functions to look at psychosocial hazards, and particularly about role clarity, for example, as Grant asked, to say it's not a safety issue alone, and it's not a HR issue, it's actually a multidiscipline issue. And I think the psychosocial field is probably the first time it's forcing those disciplines to work collaboratively. What I'm seeing in the private sector in consulting is they are very, very siloed. So when it comes to machinery, government moves and people are worried about their jobs and what their jobs are going to entail, you really need to have all of those disciplines working together to communicate with workers, consult, which the law requires, and then come up with a solution. So thanks for that, Diane. I'll go to the next question, which is for Luke. So Luke, this is from Matt, and Matt wants to ask about your thoughts around conveying rules of engagement with clients up front, such as making it clear what your expectations are regarding their behaviour. How do you go about that?
Yeah, look, I think in terms of behaviour, if you are having to engage with someone and inform them about the expectations around their behaviour up front, I think it's not so much what the words you say or what the message is. It's more about how you say. And I come back to that point I made about non-escalation. So there's many ways you could present that, and some of, there could be an approach that could either be inflammatory or it could actually be informative. And I think that's the key to it. So that self-reflection, that planning, and I think it's really important that you have a clear explanation when you engage with people, who you are, why you're there, and what it is you're actually seeking from those people. Because these are the questions in people's minds, and they're weighing up the situation. Are they going to cooperate? Are they going to challenge your authority? Are they going to actively resist, or potentially even worse? So again, there's I think the word interplay was just used in that previous discussion, and there's an interplay of a whole range of factors that's occurring in this dynamic kind of situation where you're doing that initial engagement. So you need to be adaptable and flexible, and you need to have those controls put in place prior to going there. Your background checks, you're working with your colleagues, you go out, you have your approach, you've got discrete tactics that you're applying. Don't have time to even go into that today, to put yourself in a position of advantage, being aware that, a threat or, can come from anyone, anywhere, anytime, without being hypervigilant or paranoid. And then being able to have your exit strategy so that you can apply that should it be required. But certainly I think it warrants consideration that if you have the reasons to explain why you're having certain expectations and what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, it's not so much about that message, but it's about how you deliver that. And I think that's the key with a lot of things. And it's about how you deliver yourself as a regulator when you're arriving to work with people. Empathy goes a long way. Let's get people on board as best we can, but know that there's going to be limits that are going to be beyond your control. What are you going to do when those things do occur? How do you disengage and then replan, regroup, and then re-engage? So thanks for the question. It's a really important one.
No, and it sort of leads nicely into the next question, which is around intelligence. And this area fascinates me, because I think there's two things for us to consider as regulators, and both of these require a level of intelligence on the people that we're working with, or that's been subjected to our compliance activity. So there's those people that are the intelligence that we want to plan the event. So before we go out and do the work, we need to understand who we're going to see, where we're going to see them, what the organisation is, what the threat level is. And then there's also the situation where once we get there and we're interacting with somebody, it turns nasty, and then what we do in that situation, which is about the withdrawal. So I'll throw the questions here, which is around intelligence. So what sort of warning systems do your organisations have on people or premises or companies, organisations, that would alert regulatory officers to some level of threat? And then how do you deal with that? And also, as a follow-up, if you have something in place, do you share it with any other agencies?
Certainly. That's a massive question. There's a number of aspects to that. There's privacy aspects in terms of sharing of an exchange of law enforcement information, which is probably going to vary slightly from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But as a general rule of thumb, law enforcement information, personal information that's obtained for law enforcement purposes can be shared with other law enforcement authorities. And then there's the definition of what constitutes a law enforcement authority. So, which is pretty broad actually when you look into it. So there is those possibilities, but that's around having an understanding of what your processes and procedures and the legislative framework is around sharing of information. Intelligence is critical to be intelligence-led and let the intelligence assist in informing you how you do your operations, but whilst bearing in mind that intelligence is full of gaps and intelligence can be from a particular point in time. It's not going to necessarily be indicative, but it's almost like a reminder of what could possibly happen. And if you ignore it at your own behest, really. So you take it on board. But I come back to the point that there's a potential threat from anyone, anywhere, anytime. And just because there's a lack of intelligence doesn't mean you don't have the risk. And this is a trap that I've seen firsthand, where we've done the background checks. There's no criminal history. There's no risks or any warnings in relation to the particular individual we're investigating, only to find out later, after we did the operation, we put the controls in place to do it in a time, place and manner that meant we succeeded, only to find out later that we weren't actually given all the information. There was further intelligence in relation to that particular individual or stakeholder that we weren't provided with for whatever reason. That was through our police processes and contacts. And it was possibly felt by that person who was providing information that we weren't entitled to that information. They couldn't release that information. So, but we always put the controls in place, and then that puts us in that position of advantage to reduce the offender's opportunity to assault us or to threaten us. So I have a word of intelligence is great. It's critical. Take it on board. Take notice of it. But also be aware that it's a point in time, and just because there is no intelligence to indicate any threats or warnings doesn't mean that there's not a risk. It's not about being paranoid. It's not about being hypervigilant. It's about being planned, prepared, controlled, about how you do your work, and being capable and knowing what your limitations are. And if you can't control those things, get the controls in place or go, it's not safe. You've got to have a justification for it not being safe, but make sure you've got those procedures in place and get the resources behind it. And yeah, so intelligence is it's a can of worms. Sorry, Martin, go.
No, I was just going to suggest that maybe as a matter of sort of regulatory policy, that in this day and age, given the current situation and recent events around the world, it's probably intelligence-led compliance is something that every regulator should have on their strategic radar. So you've got to prepare your officers.
And there's various levels of intelligence. We've got strategic intelligence in relation to what it is we're trying to achieve, our operation, how we're going to do it, and then the tactical, who's going to be doing what, when, where, who's arriving at what location. So, there's different types of intelligence that are going to inform various stages of your operational activities. So I was probably really talking more about the tactical side just before. But if we've got our operational intelligence in place, well, then we're going to have those procedures, and then it's going to actually help us achieve our strategic intelligence objectives for the best regulatory outcomes for the organisation.
Diane, sorry, you were going to say something.
Yeah, sorry about that. There was a delay. I thought there was a gap. Something that our organisation, a system that our organisation already has in place around gathering intelligence. Is that when the list of organisations come up for that will be that we're going out for our compliance checks, we have a relationship with the police where we get them to check the records and give us information. They don't tell us exactly what that information is, but they can help us to identify whether these are higher risk workplaces or workplaces where we can comfortably send our staff. And then the systems that we have around that is that the police may alert us to them, and they may accompany our officers if we need to attend, if we must attend that workplace. So it's a decision made in conjunction with the necessity to attend the workplace, and police officers may attend with our officers. You can determine then if you need 2 staff to attend, and that is something that probably should be considered if you're going into an unknown environment, that you have no intel about the workplace that you're attending or the individuals. And in some cases, the police have actually said, don't go at all in any circumstances, in which case we've not used that. Working with environmental the Department of Environment, they're using drones now to actually get a lot of their intelligence, so that they're actually seeing the workplaces visually. Particularly, I went out on site with onto scrap metal audits, and they've used drone intelligence to get the information that they need of what that workplace situation looks like before they even start to head to that workplace. So there's use of technology can certainly assist, and those as a government organisation, we should be leaning on those other government departments that have information that can support us.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. So I'll pose another question on that, and I might throw it to Mandy in the first instance before Luke and Diane jump in. But so the more we talk about the things that could go wrong or things that might happen, that can actually be quite frightening and daunting for individuals. So Mandy, how do we stop scaring people off from applying for jobs?
It's a very interesting question. I think from my point of view, it's about being transparent with people that are applying for work in the regulatory space. In a lot of I guess examples, I think people are aware of what they're going to apply for, but it's about being open and honest. These are the types of risks that we're exposed to. However, we have controls in place, and this is what we do. So it's about that education piece, early on. Your induction, your whole piece, you're introducing them into the role. So for me, it's about open transparency about the hazards and risks that we have, and talking to them about this is what we have in place. So they're not going in blind. They're not going to get their first phone call and there's this horrible conversation or, an external, visit or something that happens. They're aware. It's about being prepared, in my point of view.
Cool. Thanks, Mandy.
Just on that, I think it's critical that expectation management, so that people know that they can be dealing with people who are going to be unpleasant. So you're already mentally preparing yourself, but then giving them the capabilities in terms of the equipment and the support and the training and the knowledge that they have and the procedures that they have, so to enhance their safety in the workplace, and so that they do have that sense of control. And then when things don't go according to plan, review, debrief, then support them through that process and identify what they did well and those areas where, as an organisation, you can work towards continuous improvement, and then provide those individuals with the necessary support, so that that they can manage, cope, and then go on and continue to be able to do their work safely and effectively without it impacting detrimentally on them and their lives, really. And it's incumbent upon us that we do that.
Thanks very much, Luke. So just another question on the topic of academic research. So there's a lot of great academic research out there, and I sit on an expert advisory panel of academics for the National Psychosocial Safety Network. So how do you use academic research to inform your approach? Is the things that you've done within your organisations, are they based on academic research? And if so, from where or what disciplines, and how does that work?
I just missed that question, Martin. Can you just repeat it for me, please? Sorry.
Yeah, so it's about academic research, and have your solutions been based on academic research? And if they have, where was that from, or what discipline was it from?
So yes, from academic research, from literature papers, from trawling through many health and safety regulator sites as well. And there's probably some of that is inherent knowledge that I've had from previous projects that I've worked on also around safety capability for businesses. So it's really about taking that base level risk management approach that we all have used before, but we really need to start the research is valuable, but unless we actually apply it with that people-orientated approach and start involving our people, the research is going to be good information, but it's actually not going to be transferable across to practice in the workplace. So lots and lots of resources that I used, but there's Australia, we're very, very fortunate that we've got a lot of good information on our health and safety regulator sites, and across Australia, the other regulators have other useful sites, are the Health and Safety Executive in the UK. Canada is another useful site. So I guess some of it is, yes, looking at the research and seeing what's been useful, looking at the study, how it was applied, whether it was on a group and how it was put into practice. And I guess that is probably where some of the gaps in the research is that looking at how it is applied to everyday environments. But it's really finding the relevance to the roles and what we know works. But there's lots of information in Australia for us to rely on that's very well validated.
Okay, and it's a good point, because I mean, that was the reason I connected with the National Social Safety Network, is because when I was at the regulator and I was on the board of Safe Work Australia, Safe Work Australia set the National Work Health and Safety Policy, and they look after the Model Work Health and Safety Act, but they don't prescribe solutions, so they don't tell you what controls to put in place. It's performance-driven legislation. So they leave it up to the organisations to come up with their own solutions, and it's important that each organisation, each regulator, consults with its workforce, because I'll tell you now, I'll guarantee 100%, the people on the front line will tell you where the risks are and what they are. And if you write a policy or a procedure or a process from a manager level or above, that will be their view of the work, or work as imagined, and it certainly won't be a reflection of the actual activity on the ground, which is work as done. So somebody asked a question around how do you change a process or work procedure if it makes you feel unsafe. It really comes down to the culture. So if the CEO doesn't believe in it, I guarantee it won't have visibility on their radar. So it really starts at the top. And you need a process that includes the workers who are able to ventilate what those psychosocial risks and hazards are, and then use your workforce to solve them, because they're the people that are doing it. They'll know what works and what doesn't. So I'm conscious that we're sort of running up, coming up to the end of time. But I might just finish on one question, maybe Mandy can jump in. So in relation to managing the risk of harm, so how does ARPA deal with mitigating the risk of harm for regulators?
Look, it's about options. So there's not a one-size-fits-all option for support for people. So looking at, again, you talk about the consultation, the people do have that voice and their point of view, they live and breathe it. So it is important to utilise that knowledge and experience to help identify that. And, you know, EOP is part of the puzzle, our reflective practice is part of the puzzle, but there's always an opportunity for more. And I think that's the important part about any work health and safety strategy and wellbeing strategy. It's about, we've got to control monitoring it, but what else can we do? Because my needs will be different than the next person, and what works for me is different than the next person. So it is difficult in the fact that we can't have a one-size-fits-all, but it's about what other options do we have. So I think that's a really important part for people to consider as well. It's not just one, what else can we do and how do we support them better?
Well, thank you. And Luke, one more last takeaway from you before we finish with Diane.
Look, I think just what both Mandy and Diane were saying, you know, if you want to know really what the risks are and the threats and challenges, speak to the officers, get the officers and the regulators on the front line, make sure that they do talk, because quite a few of them will just think, well, this is just part of the job and we've just got to put up with it and soldier on, so to speak. So those days are gone. I've seen that, and I look back, you know, over the years and think about what we used to do years ago. Completely unacceptable with the knowledge that we have now, what can occur, and also the way the laws are around this, and that there's better and smarter ways to do the business. So get your frontline people speaking and get your management on board, because senior exec quite often don't necessarily come from that operational background. So, you know, we've got a problem here, but we're shining a light on it today, and that's terrific.
Excellent, thanks, Luke. And Diane, last closing comment from you.
Thank you. Yes, I think that it's really important that we're looking at this now, and it should not be something that's accepted as part of the job. And a lot of these roles do attract people who do accept it as part of their role. We see that also in the health sector. We see it in the enforcement roles where people are trying to help the community and accept these behaviours or this increased risk as just part of the job. So we need to change that and to say that there are things that we can do. And the other part of it, I guess, for me, is that really making sure that we look at the way we design our work to make sure that beyond talking to the people, I think I made that clear that I think that's absolutely important to all levels, leaders, supervisors, everyone in that process, but really why are we doing it? What are we there for? What can be changed to do it differently? And don't just accept the way we've always done it as the way that it has to be once we understand where the risks are.
Well, thank you. And I suppose one sort of final wrap up from me is that as a former regulator, I now spend a lot of my time working with boards and senior executives, and you set the culture, you set the tone, and if it's not on your strategic radar, then people won't pay attention to it. So I've been working with boards and executives to get it on the radar. You've got an individual duty to look after the health and safety of your people, and that includes making sure that they're psychosocially, psychologically, and physically safe at work. As Luke said, this is not acceptable anymore. You don't just suck it up and put up with it, you have to address it. So get it on your risk radar, start the risk assessment process, even if it's not looking good, the results aren't too flash. That's okay, because there's your benchmark for improvement and you work forward from there. But I guarantee you, if you don't get it on your risk radar and don't start talking about it at strategic levels, the regulator will make you do it when they come across you. So on that note, I just want to say thank you to Mandy, Luke and Diane for your contribution. Also thank you to Shannon from ANZSOG for coordinating us and herding us all to make this look quite slick. And thank ANZSOG for preparing the topic. And I think from this, there are some excellent topics that can be the subject of the next discussions, particularly around regulatory intelligence. Not that I want to prompt. Anyway, on that note, I'll wrap that up and thank everyone. Have a great afternoon and see you at the next event.